There's a time for the light and a time for the lab. Words of wisdom from Kierna Mayo. Welcome to Support is Sexy. I'm your host, Elayne Fluker, entrepreneur, author, and founder of Chic Rebellion Media. 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, I interview inspiring women entrepreneurs who share their wins and their lessons to help you take your business and your life to the next level and create something sexy. Here we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 281, another edition of the Support is Sexy Rewind. And on today's episode, we revisit words of wisdom from media maven Kierna Mayo. Kierna is vice president at Interactive One and founder of the new website, CassiousLife.com, which is fantastic. And Kierna is one of my media idols, I will say. And she talks to us on this episode about the importance of realizing that there's a time for the light and a time for the lab. And to be completely transparent with you all, this truly resonated with me because I often get wrapped up in, one, the light I believe everyone else is experiencing while I'm still grinding, which is really comparison at its worst, right? Thinking about what everyone else is doing and comparing it to yourself. Of course, I'm all about people shining, but then I look at myself and wonder, what am I not doing? Am I not doing something right? Could I be doing something better? So comparison in that way. And then the second thing is my impatience with the incubation period when a project or a new venture needs time to mature before it is really exposed to or celebrated in the light and in the world. So those are the two ways I will say this message from Kierna really hit home for me. She talks about a lot more in this episode, but this was the reason that I chose her to be a part of our Support is Sexy Rewind this week, going back, looking at some of the episodes that really impacted me over the past year. And I'm sure you'll agree, at a time when we all share damn near everything on social media, Kierna's message is the perfect reminder of when it's time to sit down and be humble. Here we go. So Kierna, thank you so much for being here for an episode of Support is Sexy. I'm excited to have you here.
Thank you so much. I am thrilled and honored. Let's do it.
Yay, very good. So first question, when did you first fall in love with entrepreneurship?
I guess I first fell in love with entrepreneurship before I had that language, you know. Mm-hmm. My dad was a sole proprietor my entire life. He had a shop in the village that evolved over time. First, he always made things. So he made this kind of paper mache jewelry in the 60s before I was born. And then by the time I was born, his shop had evolved into a leather craft shop in the heart of the village in New York City when the village was the village. So I learned the power of entrepreneurship just by literal example, you know, days of school. My mother worked for the Department of Probation, which was kind of diametrically opposed to what my dad was doing. So there were many times that I would be with him if school was out or et cetera. So I fell in love with the idea of being an entrepreneur, I think just by watching the autonomy that my father always seemed to have and how artistic his life was, and really our family life was, I think, in large part as a result of his entrepreneurship.
Now, you grew up as a Brooklyn girl, right?
I did. Born and raised. I was born on Atlantic Avenue, for anyone who knows.
For anyone who knows, an actual Brooklyn girl, a real Brooklyn girl. What was a young Kierna like growing up in Brooklyn?
Oh, wow, Elayne. You know, in a lot of ways, I think I was a consummate Brooklyn girl. Again, I was very young in the 70s and became a teenager in the 80s. A lot of New York City life, not just Brooklyn life, was very much shaped by, Reaganomics and the crack era epidemic. And I came from a very loving, supportive, and healthy kind of home environment. So when you juxtapose that life at home to what I was, I guess, experiencing and living just outside of my home, it shaped me into a very kind of worldly, in my own mind at least, sophisticated youngster. I was a window shopper at 11. I was in the clubs at 14. I was very connected to just culture and people. Before I knew that that's what was my kind of driver, I was just living that true New York City life. I was so many hours spent on the subway. I commuted to school for an hour each way. I was a latchkey kid. I mean, I think it was a very different time then. So it was not unlike most of my peers. But I was always a girl's girl. I mean, some of these things I've grown to understand the power of now in hindsight. But at the time, like all of us as youngsters, we're just doing our best to be who we are. So I have always been surrounded by girls. I always had a crew. Our crew always had a name.
What was the name of your crew?
Oh, goodness. I have many, many crews. The one that sticks out to me the most is Aka Joe, which was actually named after a designer called Aka Joe. Weird stuff that happened in the 80s. I can flash forward to that time later, but a lot happened in that time. Actually, what leads up to that, I was going to say I was a hip hop kid, in large part because I am of that era, in that kind of nascent time when hip hop was born, really. I was a youngster. I definitely, absolutely had all of Sugar Hill's collection on wax. That was something I absolutely made my mother go and do. We had to make record shop runs. I have everyone's single, from Curtis Blow on down. But then my life became hip hop in another way. I think in the way that hip hop grew to shape culture. And so I say that to say it was more than music that was attracting me. I ended up going to elementary school with folks who would go on to make records. I mean, middle school and then high school with a group of rappers who would go on to become kind of world renowned. So just kind of coincidentally or maybe
not.
just, or not, right? Maybe just kind of fate led. My world and influences was very much centered in this world of hip hop. I also was a dancer, of course, not professionally trained, but very much a hip hop dancer and then a club dancer and, danced in high school at the talent show with my crew, another crew. So all of those worlds collided. Style, music, just the grit of New York, right? Being on the train. I went to a high school where many of us were, it wasn't a zone high school. So for anyone who is from the New York City area, and probably most schools around the country, you go to school near where you live. When I grew up, high schools were beginning to diversify in New York City, and a lot of what were known as zone schools were notoriously bad. So the high school that my mother called herself shipping me off to was in Lower Manhattan. So here I am, this Brooklyn kid. Now I'm experiencing Manhattan on my own. Come to find out, I'm going to high school with kids who are from Harlem and Staten Island and Hollis, Queens and Jamaica. And so we're all colliding. And it's really important to note, I think, because it's only now that I'm realizing how unique of an experience this was. We were subcultures kind of mixing, when everyone's like, Brooklyn stand up or Harlem stand up. That began to mean different things in this petri dish that was my high school. And it helped me understand the importance of another lens really early, really early, because I was so Brooklyn and it was all I knew that when I encountered Harlem, it was like, oh,
it's like another world.
It's another world, right? And, now I'm on the Staten Island ferry going to hang out with my girl Kimberly and seeing the Force MDs on the ferry singing. And so there were lots of moments for me that were about awakenings very early on. And I began to collect stories and collect these mini awakenings and strung them together really to formulate my formula for the rest of my life.
Where was high school? You said
Yes, excuse me. The name of the high school is Murray Bertram High School. At the time, it was for business careers, and it's in Lower Manhattan, right at the base of the Brooklyn Bridge. It's, excuse me, I have a siren going by.
That's okay.
It's New York. Hello,
New York
Brooklyn.
life, exactly.
Hello. It's now is a very low performing school, ironically, but at the time it was one of New York's better schools, and just was a really exciting place to be in the late 80s, as hip hop is beginning to become this thing that's exported on a national stage and then international stage.
And who are some of the people that you mentioned that you went to school with who have now become these sort of legends in hip hop, which of course you didn't know then, right?
Oh, of course not. And they didn't either.
Right.
I tell this story a lot. It feels really weird. But so the Jungle Brothers, they were a big part of my kind of high school career. They always performed in the high school talent shows as the Jungle Brothers, and then A Tribe Called Quest. Most of the members of A Tribe Called Quest went to, or two of the members of a Tribe Called Quest went to my high school. And there were just lots of other, lesser known groups that were there that began to be in studios. So Red Alert is the uncle of Mike G, who is one of the founders of the Jungle Brothers, who in the 80s was a big group. And, if you know anything about 80s hip hop and how it becomes 90s hip hop, you understand the native tongues, and you know that there is no native tongues without the foundational beginnings of the Jungle Brothers. And Mike and Red Alert, who was the premier DJ in New York City, disc jockey, were related. And so Mike had a lot of access to things that other city kids just typically didn't. And I believe that he was really instrumental in kind of sharing his world with all of the other kids who wanted to be rappers, DJs, dancers, graph artists, etc., and gave them real access at a time before the machine that would become this multi-billion-dollar industry had really shaped itself. So excuse me. So that was a deal. And of course, Q-Tip, who today is still one of my besties, was just my heart in high school. So having that kind of friendship, which then evolves into him becoming, a real international star, certainly throughout the early 90s, and having that kind of alignment in my own life and being able to witness, again, stories and witness other people's entree and access into worlds was really an important part of me following my dreams and becoming who I am today.
So let's talk about your dreams and the things that you had at that time. Did witnessing all of that, I would imagine seeing it all of the cultures coming together and the different experiences and collecting those stories, at what point did it influence you in the way that you felt that you wanted to tell these stories or share these stories in some way as a writer and later as an editor?
Right. I would say it really came together for me in college. Just really at the advent of A Tribe Called Quest, they're doing their thing and Tip is in the studio. And, ironically, back then it was really hard to watch friends who were your actual friends become real stars, because then you had to share them. And of course, there's a changing dynamic, and I don't know anyone famous. And now one of my closest friends is legitimately that. So it was
Nobody talks about that. That's interesting.
Yeah, he and I only now really visit that space because, again, 2021, those, even before then, maybe 19, I'd say, is a changing time for anyone anyway, whether you're becoming famous or your bestie is becoming famous or not, right? You're trying to shape who you are. Your identity is, you're all about who you think you are and what you're putting out into the world. So I had this parallel experience of trying not to be jealous and trying not to be left out, and at the same time asserting myself in new ways because of the things that I'm learning right alongside of my boy. So it was really interesting. But as a writer, I've been a writer my whole life, not by name, but by practice. Just a little girl who wrote in her diary and tried to write a few rhymes in elementary school, and then went on to being somebody who wrote poetry and just what I found to be the softer side of writing, meaning just that thing that allowed me an emotional outlet. And then when I got to school, a true story, I went to Hampton University and
Yay!
Yes, yay! And the legendary magazine editor and now cultural critic and just kind of undeniable cultural force, Emil Wilbekin, was an upperclassman when I was a freshman and sophomore. And my girlfriend, Tiffany Roberts, bless her heart, she passed away not too long ago, started a big fashion show at Hampton, aligned with the AKAs. And it was the first time that Hampton was really doing something this signature. And we were just imagining ourselves to be just the it girls of campus and, you know, always style centric and style driven. We were going to hand select the most stylish people on campus to be a part of this thing. And so, of course, Emil Wilbekin, this hot upperclassman who's walking across campus in a ponytail and always fly, has to be in the show. So that begins my relationship with him. And he was the editor of the Hampton Script, which is our school newspaper. And I would always say to him, man, you know, I wish I could do that. I'd love to do that. I'd love to write. And he was like, why don't you just do it? Why don't you just do it? And I finally took him up on it and reached out to some of the editors at the Hampton Script and really never looked back. I think that first time I saw my name in lights, you know, that first byline was really addicting. And I was like, oh boy, I'm on to something, and I can turn around. I'd always been kind of soapboxy, especially back then. So the idea of being able to be opinionated and to share these thoughts and to begin to tell stories, beginning mostly with my own, and then, of course, seeing my name as a byline was just a powerful moment for me. And I was also a creative writer, so I'd write poetry, and someone had submitted some of my work anonymously to a campus-wide Gwendolyn Brooks competition, and I came in second place, and it was just really thrilling for me. Like, a lot of things had affirmed this path for me before I was brave enough to claim it for myself. Now, mind you, I was a mass media major, but I was a very reluctant mass media major, and that was our euphemism for our catch-all for journalism, print, TV, radio, etc. I ended up going on a print track, but print at the time surely meant newspapers.
Right.
And I was trying to find a way to make that make sense for me. The Hampton Script was the bomb, but I wasn't a traditional hard news reporter. I was very lifestyle centric, and I didn't really know how to make a lane for myself in the world of newspapers. I was a magazine file my entire life, having been, you know, tall and skinny, which was not always an easy thing to be, especially as a Black girl growing up in the 80s in Brooklyn. I mean, now people are like, oh, it's amazing, you're a supermodel, but it wasn't easy to be 14 and lanky and taller than everyone else, right? So my mom really early on had introduced me to magazines. She was always very interested in style, and we always had L's and Vogues and Essences and magazines around the house. So I just followed in her steps, and she would say, you look just like Iman. You look just any Black model. My mother was like, you look just like her, because I, of course, was doubting myself and my looks and my body, and she would affirm me by using Black models. So the attraction to magazines, and then the attraction to what I'm discovering beyond just style and models and fashion in magazine, but the storytelling and the lifestyle space, and the culture reporting. So I realized, you know, really by the time I had graduated from Hampton, that I wanted to be an Essence girl. I just wanted to be at Essence magazine so very badly. It just was the only place on the planet I could see myself being. And this is by the time I'm 20 and ready to graduate from college. And so I had applied for an internship at Essence and didn't get it. And it was really disheartening. And, you know, I was like, why did I go to college? This is all such a waste.
It's the end of the world.
Absolutely. I'll be nothing ever. And I had a girlfriend who was a mass media major as well. And she told me that her homeboy from high school, she was from DC, had just started this rap magazine in New York. And, you know, maybe I should reach out to him. And I was like, hip hop, like magazine? It didn't make sense. Again, I've been this hip hop person because it had been a lived experience for me, not because I was observing it as a culture. It was just my life. So the idea of documenting it as more than just the way people live, which is how I thought everyone lived, was weird. And I didn't buy it almost. I was like, what do you mean rap magazine? That's crazy. If it, you know, I only could imagine the tabloids of the time, and I would consider myself a far more serious writer and person. So long story short, I reach out to him, and it begins the beginning of my career. I started off literally as the assistant to the publisher in an unpaid role that quickly evolved to me being on the editorial side once people realized that this girl absolutely needs a platform, and she is not going to be good at getting coffee for very long.
Right. That's not going to work. And that magazine was the source, right?
Yes, right. So that magazine was the source. I'm sorry I didn't tell that part.
No, that's okay.
And it was the source when the source was absolutely the source. And this is, everything in its proper time context. This is before Vibe, and this is before MTV's Real World, and this is before a lot of the things that we have taken for granted, as the tipping point of exporting our culture happened. So we are the conversation place. Mm-hmm. And we are very much like MTV's Real World, what it would become, because now you've got myself and another Black woman, Dream Hampton. A lot of folks know her from those early days as a writer at that time. We are Black girls in a room with like Jewish boys and some Black boys, and everybody's coming from different places, whether it's NYU or Howard, in my case, Hampton, or Harvard. It was a really interesting social experiment to be dissecting a culture that most of us had lived and some of us had wanted to live for the first time as intellectuals, really.
And how did you hold your own as you and Dream? How did you hold your own in that space as women amongst all these men who are, as you said, from different angles, either observing this culture, wanting to be a part of it, were a part of it, and that kind of thing? But just as women in general, how you hold your own in that space?
Yeah. In hindsight, kind of awkwardly at times, with strength and conviction most times, but there were challenges. There were many, many, many challenges. I think I'll speak for myself. Again, in hindsight, I feel like those things were sharpening my knife in many respects. Dealt with a lot of what we have language for today, certainly, harassment, large degrees of kind of patriarchal thinking and practices. But we were not unheard, I would say, and were very influential, I think, on the guys. And had I not had that experience, and had I not been groomed in media, because again, media is changing rapidly, and I'm at the source for almost 4 years, beginning in 1991. And it gave me the underpinning to know that Honey Magazine could happen. I was partnered with my best friend from Hampton, Joycelyn Dingle, and she was my business partner, quote unquote, and we would spend hours and hours and hours at Kinko's making copies of our business plan. And, we would do focus groups all around the country, and we put together every penny we had to kind of prove a business case for what would grow to become Honey Magazine. But the foundation for me was at the source, was realizing that I had a point of view that was not only mine, but shared by many others, and that it was important to create lanes. And in the way that Dream and myself had kind of created a lane for a lot of women who were interested in dissecting the elements of this culture themselves, if not just interested in feeling represented, I realized that this could happen at a larger level. But I also began to understand some of the business of media because I was able to observe it really up close. And I think before I got to the source, you could have never told me that you didn't have to be a 65-year-old white man to be a publisher. I didn't understand that there was another relationship to this. And even though I had this love fest with Essence, I didn't understand it from a business standpoint at all at that time. It was purely how it had been marketed and how I received it in my heart as a young Black woman reading its pages. So in my 4 years at the source, I began to understand the relationship between advertising and magazines and media. I began to understand the importance of promotions and marketing, and the relationship between those things and how they sometimes influence editorial products. Often, not just sometimes, often influence editorial products. So it made me a much stronger, very, very young first-time editor-in-chief. So it wasn't just that I became the editor-in-chief of Honey because I had a vision that was purely editorial based. I also knew that there were seeds here to potentially make a lot of money.
Right. Do you feel like, too, I just know, at least up to this part of your journey, it seems like you have in many ways sort of moved forward and felt your way. So not necessarily knowing, obviously, what hip hop culture would develop into from, the time of high school, or even your writing, not knowing what trying out or writing for the Hampton Script would become later. And I just ask that because I feel like a lot of us sometimes sit in this space where we have these things where we want to do. And if we're not certain of the outcome, or what we think the outcome will do if we try these things, working for The Source, for example, a magazine that you weren't sure about when you first heard about it, we don't make a move. So do you think that's been something that's been critical to your just your success and your journey along the way?
Oh, Elayne, absolutely. I mean, not just critical, it is the story. And for a long time, when I did reach a certain level of professional success, I had some shame around the fact that my trajectory was so non-traditional, if you will. And I would compare myself to people who I felt had a plan that they lived out verbatim. You know how, especially when you're a very young woman, you're like, by 25, I'll do this. And by 30, I have this. And you have your checklist. And I knew many people who were living as close to their checklist as one could. But that had never been my truth. And I think had I forced myself into a box, I would have never discovered what I know now, which is that I don't know what tomorrow holds for me. I do have some ideas about how I'd like tomorrow to be shaped, but I know enough now. I'm clearly wise enough to understand that there is no telling, and I'm good with that. Because this is a faith walk. For a lot of Black women, the notion of success will have to be defined by you. There is no catch-all definition of success that works for everyone. And if you try to force your circle into someone else's square, you will get sick, you will have breakdowns, you will not be successful. You will be a facsimile of something else and never have tapped into what Iyanla in her first book called The Power Within.
That's right.
And I am somebody who now at this age, it's crazy because I hear myself talking and I hear the influence of Iyanla and Susan and all of these greats who really shaped me, not just as a writer and a thinker, but as a spirit-led person. And I don't mean this to sound religious at all, because I am not religious at all, but I do believe that there's something greater at play, and that it allows us inherent flexibility, and it allows us to forgive ourselves time and time again if we're willing to. And I'm somebody who, that's a big part of my journey, like learning to forgive myself for this misstep, or for that inaction, or for that time I was lazy, or for the email I didn't return, or whatever. And I think we need to pull back the veil on the need for self-forgiveness, because we beat ourselves down to the ground.
Worse than anybody else.
Worse than anybody else. And I mean, maybe at this point it's even cliche to point that kind of stuff out, because we're in this post-Oprah world and everybody knows that self-care, quote unquote, is important. But I still don't think that we fully practice it. We know things intellectually that we still don't practice emotionally. At least I know I have been so guilty of that.
I think I'm sorry to interrupt you. I was just going to say, I think your point about the post-Oprah world, I feel like some of us beat ourselves up more because now it's like, well, you know better, and I still don't have time to get a massage. You know what I mean? Like it's almost like, well, damn, I wish I didn't even know that that's something that I need. Damn, I don't have time for self-care.
all this enlightenment, and then what do you do with that when you're
Right.
still behavior hasn't changed, but you know so much more?
Right. Exactly.
Maya says you know better, you do better, and then you find yourself not doing that, and you feel really crazy. But
Right.
that's the piece about forgiveness.
Right.
Just self forgiveness. It's a daily exercise for me. I'm better at it on some days than I am on others. But to the extent to which I give myself a pass is the extent to which I lean in again the next day and try all over again. What the hell? Nothing to lose, you know?
Amen. Nothing to lose. So, what advice would you say that you have then for young? Well, first of all, of course, we know the industry has changed. It changes every day now. As far as media, we've both been in it for a long time. It just seems like
Yes,
every day is something new, and it's faster and faster.
yes,
But what
yes.
advice would you say that is sort of, I guess, evergreen advice for young women who are aspiring writers and editors today?
hmm Um, well, one of my professors said something to me at Hampton that really stuck with me. Um, and that was a writer writes, And that, again, may sound really cliche, but I think it is so fundamental to any writer's truth. Because if you're not bothered when you're not writing, you probably aren't a writer. Now, that said, it may be 2 years between picking up a pen or picking up your laptop. It may be 20 for some writers, but it should nag you all 20 years, and it should nag you all too, because the job of a writer is to write. And that doesn't mean you have to be published in a space where other people see your name. It means you have to be about the work of putting pen to paper. So that is the first thing that I would say. If you're waiting for permission to write, ask yourself if you're really serious about being a writer, because the writing comes first. The opportunities come after that. The praise comes later. The critiques, the edits, the jobs, all the other stuff comes after the writing. You're not a writer in theory. You're a writer in practice, or not, full stop, right? And I'm saying this as somebody who hasn't had a proper byline in a few years, I'm ready to say. So that's the first piece. The other thing is to stay present. You have to know that, and I mean present in a business sense, in a media sense. Know the world in which you want to enter. It really kills me when I hear from people who say they want one thing, whether it's entree into media or not, but they say they want to be in a world that they then seem so ignorant about, and it's like there are no excuses today. Like, I just don't really even make space for somebody who comes across to me as like not knowledgeable about the thing they say they're passionate about the space they say they want to know. If you are not clear that today, for example, if you are dying to be a, quote, magazine writer, as though that's anybody's job. Most people do many other things. If you actually have a byline in the magazine, either you're a freelancer or you're an editor doing a whole lot more than just writing. But that said, if you just want to see your name in lights at Elle or at Essence or at wherever, if in 2017 you don't understand the relationship between Essence Print and Essence.com, then I say to you, you're not serious about entering this space. You have to know that media, like all industries, is changing overnight. And of course, you're going to know more once you're in the game, but there's no excuse for not being a keen observer. And a lot of people just think they can have a fantasy of being something or doing something. And again, this really applies across the board, whatever your dream is. But then they don't do the work to be knowledgeable. And, the University of YouTube is real. A Google PhD can be yours too.
Right.
Like
it's access to so much information.
Yes. So don't be ignorant. Be knowledgeable. Be smart. And lead with that. Make decisions that feel good for you, but also seem like they make sense in the world, the space you want to be in. So I guess, that's my kind of business advice for writers and for media people. Today's folks, I work a lot with millennials, and I'm very grateful to millennials, quite frankly. Hear a lot of people my age kind of begrudge a generation, an entire generation. I've never really been that person. For one, I'm too youth centric myself in terms of my own personal spirit, but also, I was a millennial before millennials, and that's real. So I don't even play that. I don't even
Right.
let take the space from me like that. I'm like, okay, I created millennials. I gave birth to all of you.
Right.
But I think it is important to learn from people who are coming up behind you and understanding, like using millennials specifically to say that you guys are inheriting a world that gives you so much personal access and opportunity that others didn't have. When I was at the source, when Dream was at the source, and when, all of the guys that became well known for this or that came out of that early so-called hip hop journalism movement, there were no blogs. There was no place else to really be discovered. And we would get letters, handwritten, typed letters, just actual physical letters by the hundreds from aspiring folks just like us. And it wasn't lost on me even then how rare the opportunity was, like how blessed we were to be so singular when there were clearly thousands of other people who wanted to walk this same walk. Mm-hmm. But now today, you can. Like, the democracy of the internet means that you don't have to be a Brooklyn girl who grew. You don't have to wait for the stroke of luck, for the lightning strike to happen. You can kind of institute that yourself, by carving your way through this social media space, through any number of outlets now that make space for intelligent thinkers and writers. And yourself what cream looks like online, because we're all bombarded with, more stuff than we can even take in, which to me is my theory about why the cream always rises. Like, make yourself good, sharpen your own knife, and utilize every possible avenue available to you, because you really don't have to have the same complete stroke of luck that I had to have, at least to say that you are somebody who takes writing seriously. And not to name drop, but my baby and heart and star, Jamila Lemieux, is a Black woman writer and millennial feminist, and very established person in the world of certainly Black media, but Black social media as well. And she's somebody who I met through her work. Mm-hmm. So I have to tell that story. And I stalked her, even when I didn't really have anything to offer her. I just kind of was like, who the hell is this girl who keeps saying the things that I wished I said, or I would have said, or feels like my 25-year-old self, and just, kind of falling in love. I was a fan really before I was her boss.
And that's because she was doing the work too before she
doing the work. Exactly. Right. And broke doing the work. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So that is to know. Now, again, the world, because it changes so much, I think from 6 years ago when Jamila makes her entree into this space, at least professionally, is a very different time today. It's not to say that everybody who has a blog is going to be discovered by their boss to be, but you certainly can have a collection of clips that you're proud of that you can show when I ask you for it, even if I haven't discovered it on my own. If I say to you, send me a clip, and you have to say you'll get back to me, that's a red flag.
Right. Like, you're not working right now. You're not doing the work.
You're not doing the work right now. And then the other thing is to understand that media is more than just writing, and storytelling today is so much more than just the written word. I fret that we have moved so far away from the written word that folks aren't really exercising skillful writing and aren't learning some of the fundamentals about skillful writing and poignant writing, because there's so many other ways to tell stories. Now, those stories are no less important, but I think that fundamentals will always be fundamentals. A classic is always a classic is always a classic. Mm-hmm. There's a reason Before I Let Go is still the song that closes out the Black Party.
Right. Exactly.
Right. That's like, so what works at one point probably is going to work in the future. So, knowing how to be good at writing is a fundamental communication skill. But if you can edit some footage, I'm checking for you even harder. If you can pick up a camera, if you are a producer, if you know how to package, when I came up as a magazine editor, packaging was the differentiator between editors who would climb that masthead and those who didn't.
Right.
People who understood how to not just take their one story idea and, either commission it or write it themselves, but to contextualize it in a larger format, in a larger fashion. How can your single story shape the entire shape the entire front of the book, shape the entire back of the book? Like, how can something that you're thinking, ideating around, influence a section? Now, today's packaging looks different than it did for me when I was in print. Packaging is about multimedia. Packaging is about podcasts, right, Elayne? Look at your solution. Look at your actual example of the many things that you've touched. And I'm sure you had some of the same writer, editor, black girl dreams of being in print that I had, and so many women like
Hampton Script and everything.
Exactly. Like before us and after us, we'll still have, but look at what you're doing now, So being flexible, that whole thing about evolving and not getting stuck is a real life skill. And it is imperative that all Black women embrace that. We don't want to be, the burden that our mothers and their mothers had of just getting through and just getting by. So many of us have more opportunity than just that life. Yes, we still have to get through, and yes, we still have to get by. But if we're truth tellers, there's so much more living available to us. And if we don't carve spaces for ourselves that allow us to not just be angry, because there's a whole lot of reasons to be angry, Black women, and it's funny, people kind of resent that stereotype. And I do too, but I think that there's something legitimate about Black women's anger. And I don't think that we always have to tuck it in.
Right.
But I think that it's important not to just be angry, not to just be left out, not to just be struggling. We know we struggle, but that's not the whole damn story, not in 2017. And if we're not careful, if we're not flexible, both in the way that we work and the way that we live, if you don't have that little bounce back gene, then you can be taken under by life. You can get stuck in the angry spaces. When shit goes wrong, when it turns left, when you meant to go right, you can get stuck there if you're not careful. And, to my earlier point about initially having shame about my trajectory being so untraditional, I have had jobs and I have lost jobs. I have been popular and I have been unknown. I have been on the VIP list at the party and then not gotten a call to come. So I know what it feels like to be, at many different places emotionally around my work. But the work that you do that pays your bills is not the only defining thing. Even if you're a celebrated person and so-called successful, that's still not your whole story. But being able to survive the death of friends like I did, or being able to survive an abusive marriage like I did, or being able to survive, a disheartening professional relationship when everything should be all good and when what everyone sees from the outside is glory and what you're living is hell, like I did. And I say myself as every woman because I don't think that I'm any more special than anyone within the sounds of my voice. I really think it's about tenacity. I just think that is the Black woman's key to success. It is about survival and, recognizing that you can do this. Like, you are not here because you can't. You are here because you can. And we're going to get through this Trump shit. And we're going to get through it. Yes, we will.
Yes, we will. Absolutely. Yes, all right. So I was going to ask you, speaking about, I know we only have a little bit of time left, so I want to be respectful of your time. But one thing I wanted to ask you about, I think the last time I saw you, I showed you my honey hat. I still have my honey hat from the launch party, I believe it was.
Yes.
I love that hat. I still wear it all the time. But anyway, I wanted to ask you, though, just about that experience. I know I was at the premiere party. It was fabulous. Just an amazing, talk about Black girl magic before that was even a thing, or we had the language for it, as you say. But what was it?
Even though at Honey, we did call it magic. We were like, we're magic girls. That's what we would call us.
See, you even charting a path even with that. There you go. Mm-hmm. So what was it like, though, at that moment of, just because we're talking a little bit about business and the combination of media, at the moment that you knew that you would have to walk away from something that you and Joycelyn had worked so hard on and developed, and as you say, going to Kinko's, making the copies, doing all of that. What was that moment like for you?
Devastating. Just devastating. Really can't put it into words. One, we were young. Two, we were dreamers. Three, we were dreamers who had actually actualized our dream. So then to have it snatched away it just kind of floored us. But it was a business lesson, mm-hmm. And it was something now in hindsight, again, had that not happened to me, I just don't think that I'd be who I am today. I don't think I'd have the same tenacity that I'm advising all Black women lean into. What more can I say? We embarked on Honey magazine as entrepreneurs. I told you the story of us, shopping this business plan, or maybe I didn't, but mm-hmm. we shopped our business plan for many years, and we always thought of ourselves as more than just creatives. We really wanted to be respected in business. That said, we didn't have a lot of business experience, and we certainly didn't have any money. So the first thing to know is that in business, you need capital. So you really need to be able to craft a plan that will lend itself to fundraising. Mm-hmm. And we didn't do that. And we didn't do it well. We weren't able to understand the necessity of, we understood the necessity of fundraising, but we never cracked that nut as to how to do it at the level we knew we needed to. Our personal circle wasn't wide enough. We hadn't gone to business school. We didn't really have the blueprint, if you will. We had the passion. So we took our business plan, and I'll keep it short, to the original publisher of Honey, who after many months of negotiations came back to us and said, well, girls, you can leave your lawyers at home because we are not interested in doing a business deal with you, but we'll hire you if you want to be the editor-in-chief and editorial director of this magazine. At the time, we hadn't finalized the name. You certainly can. But look, we were going to do a Black L before you walked in the door here. Mm-hmm. Coincidence? Mm-hmm. Of course. Mm-hmm. So, ladies, the thing to know is this is going to happen with or without you, said ex-sir Jewish guy. And so we just sit there kind of dumbfounded, like, are we hearing what we're hearing? Is this really real? Like, can this happen? Then you go home, you call your mother, you call your lawyer, and, look, there had never been a Honey, right? So there was no precedent.
Right.
There was Essence that at the time had been in negotiations with Time Inc., which was now taking Essence from an independent publisher to a major brand, a major publisher, and fewer magazines were being published by these indie spaces. And, after almost 5 years of crying and praying and writing and typing and kinkoing, it's like, is it worth it to say no? I thought, we're saying to ourselves, like, the end goal is to get this thing on newsstands, and maybe we'll come back and buy it. And maybe, there's a lot of naivete as well. But there was never the lack of business desire. Mm-hmm. So in the end, we pretty much sold our rights, wrote our rights away at the outset. So the other backstory that's happening at the same time is that we realized that this publisher is just kind of a horrible place to develop a brand that is going to speak to a nation of young Black women who had kind of come up on hip hop and were the daughters of our Essence moms. And we knew that we were going to have to figure out a new relationship to these folks. So I had given our business plan to Keith Klingscales, who was at the time the president of Vibe magazine and a very influential person coming up in the world of traditional publishing. And what was unique about him is that he was a young Black person, right? And he's really celebrated for what's happening over at Vibe, et cetera. And, I really trusted Keith and his team and really thought that that was going to be our way out. Come to find out, Keith had his own sights set on Honey, and he was developing his own business as a publisher and as a person who understood how media worked, how it was bought and sold, not the content piece, because I think what revealed itself very early on with Keith and many other hands that touch not just Honey, but folks who think that they can just switch editors and switch folk because it doesn't matter and all content creators are created equal, et cetera. They don't understand the magic making side. He, behind our backs, was in negotiations with the publishers of Honey to buy this magazine outright, even though he understood clearly, because he had my business plan, that that was our goal. We were looking to him for some cash. So we had got another person to agree to invest in us, and they made a call to the publishers of Honey, and that's how we discovered that Keith was on his way to buying the magazine outright. And of course I was livid, and you've already heard me speak in French because I'm a girl who believes in French sometimes.
Right.
But my French was through the roof. And at the time I had absolutely no filter and was so hurt and devastated. And, there was no such thing as being politically correct in this context, because you were taking the only child at that point that I had ever had away from me.
Deliberately.
Yeah, deliberately. So it was a volatile situation, at which point, I believe that it was his intention and his company's intention to hire us, much like the last group of men. We were going to trade our Jewish male bosses for our Black male bosses. Again, just relegating us to the sideline. Go ahead, paint in the corner, girls, and show us what you've made, but have no business interest in this thing that you're building that we're about to take off on. And P.S. is the foundational piece for how we're raising money for the business that we're creating.
Right, and get all the other girls to follow you, but you just stay in that corner. You all stay in that corner.
Yes, because at the time when Keith began Vanguard Media, the publications that he would launch hadn't launched. So when he emerged into Savoy, what was his other piece? Didn't he have one other magazine? Anyway, the point was, I know in my heart that as they peddled their dream for their company, they were talking about this asset that they were very close to acquiring. So business, right? And it just, all these years later, it still hurts to know that could happen. And I often wonder what would have happened if we were cut in on the business, and if I didn't have to curse Keith and his boys out and break up in that cold way and walk away cold from the magazine. But hey, look, just as quickly as that happened, we got a call from the legendary George Jackson, who was one of the producers of New Jack City and just a truly amazing business creative who just fell in love with us, fell in love with what we were doing at Honey, and at the time was in talks with us to develop honey.com, which, who knew what a website could be at that time? And, we saw that as this brand new opportunity. But then when we lost Honey, went back to him and told him, we don't have it, and I'm sure you don't want us. And he was like, to hell with Honey. We want you because we know that you are behind, again, the magic. And so he left the Honey situation sad, but not broke, because we doubled our salary and we got cut in on the business of what would become Urban Box Office. So that was a 1.0 digital platform that was a real foray for me into stretching the tentacles of my career. Had I not been at a website in 2000, maybe I wouldn't be the SVP of content and brands for Interactive One today.
Right. You never know how that journey is going to turn out, right?
Exactly.
Thank you
Exactly.
so much for sharing that story. I hadn't asked you about it before, and it's something that I've always wondered about. I knew some of the story, of course, just being in media, but I wanted you to share it too, just for people to hear. One, you never know how it's going to turn out, and that
Right.
we all. I think what you said earlier made me think about the story too, is because getting through those moments where we have to forgive ourselves for what we might perceive as a misstep, which in the end might be how it was all supposed to turn out, but going through those periods in business, especially where there are going to be low points or you miss something or someone actually takes advantage of you and that kind of thing. So I appreciate you sharing that story with us.
Oh, thank you for allowing me to. I found my courage to tell the story. In the beginning, when people would ask, I would, give it in like fits and starts, and I would leave out names, and I would be very obscure, and I had shame around it. But then I also was like, well, what if somebody hears me complaining and doesn't give me another opportunity? There's a lot of fear around business failure.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of fear around telling the truth around what could be perceived as business failures. But I have learned in my later years that it's all good. Tell it all.
Tell it all. It's your story. Just a couple more questions for you. One of the things you posted that sort of speaks to this on Instagram a while ago was a quote, or a lesson, I should say, you learned from Muhammad Ali. Fear no one, fight back, know your power. So I was just curious, when's the last time that you had to call on this lesson for yourself, in business or otherwise, of fear no one, fight back, and know your power?
If I'm honest, the last time that I really felt like I had to employ, that brilliant kind of warning and call to action from the great Muhammad Ali, perhaps the most unapologetic figure that has ever lived, was when I was the editor-in-chief of Ebony magazine. And ironically, he was my last cover, Muhammad. So it's funny that would be the one quote that you pulled from my Instagram. You know how things happen.
Yep.
Maybe a coincidence at all. And stay tuned, because I'm actually working on something right now. We're about to launch a major brand platform over at Interactive One. Yeah, it's coming in the spring, and it has a little something to do with Muhammad Ali. So I'll just leave it at that.
Ooh, tease. You big tease.
Yeah, little tease. Little tease. But that was a tough situation. It not exactly what I imagined that walk to be.
As editor-in-chief of Ebony, you mean?
As editor-in-chief of Ebony, every person who looks like you doesn't always have your back. I think that's an important thing for Black women, especially Black women who are women's women. Those of us who are kind of oriented toward the affinity of female spaces, and who resist that idea that, you got to watch women, and I'm not friends with girls because they'll do this. Those of us who kind of consciously resist that line of thinking, or at least have had a life experience that is counter to that, can be shocked when Black women aren't always your protectors, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I experienced some of that at Ebony. It wasn't all bad, but it certainly wasn't all good. And I had to figure out how to fight differently for what I believed in, because it was a turnaround time for that brand. And it was my job to figure out how to bring a certain level of relevance that really had begun with Amy Barnett, two editors before me, for Ebony, to a new world of millennials and this kind of fast-moving digital piece. And, before I was the editor-in-chief, I was the editorial director of the site and then VP of digital content for Ebony. So I had been watching what was happening in the landscape of digital media. But again, Ebony was very traditional in a lot of ways, and an independent publisher, and located in Chicago, which is outside of the New York City publishing arena.
Right.
So they had a lot of disadvantages that, in my professional opinion, they were somewhat unaware of, or ignorant to, or maybe arrogant about. So I was charged with something meaning bringing a certain level of relevance that everyone didn't fully understand how grand a move that was or how tall a task that was. And so I just had to stop asking for permission at a certain point and just do me. You know, there's a certain point in your career, if you've done what you do long enough, where you have to trust your gut. And it's not that your gut is always right. You know, it's not that you know everything, but at some point you have to say what you know.
Right.
And you have to say what you feel, and you have to say what you believe. And I really do believe that I was very instrumental in helping Ebony, at least, you know, in the last 18 months, or the 6 months. 6 months ago is when I left. But in the 18 months before that, I really believe that my leadership, that my covers, that my strategy, that my personality had a lot to do with the resonance that the brand had, at least at that time. You know, because it was a 70-year-old startup, you know, an entire generation that had either dismissed it or didn't care about it, or maybe didn't even know about it, that I was responsible for bringing into the fold while not losing our core audience. And, you know, all of Black America, you know, clearly we're not a monolith. We certainly aren't generationally. So
you absolutely was, sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to second that you were absolutely instrumental from a reader standpoint, speaking as a reader, of people paying more attention to the magazine, talking more about the magazine and the digital space, both when you first started at the website and just from the covers with the one with Bill Cosby, of course, or the Cosby Show, and the fractured cover, which I post on Instagram. It's like, this is amazing, which caused a lot of talk, which is what you want people to talk and have conversations. You've never shied away from that. And then the other cover that I love, where you had America Loves Black, and then it said people, but culture was written over it in purple.
Yep.
Genius. So
those are my, thank you. Those are my two favorite covers.
Oh, see, we're aligned. Yeah.
Those
So
are my favorite covers.
But I think
because they're, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think you speak, you know, you've always been a game changer, but I think in that space too is an example of what you've been talking about this whole time, of sort of stepping into it and doing what you believe in, and, you know, going after it and really being about the work too, because the work was, it seemed at least, was always your primary focus, the work and the people that you were serving.
Absolutely. The work and the people that I'm serving, and the people who I surround myself with, the people who have been the teams that have created a space for me to lead. You know, I have had a lot of help. I can be a loner personally, but I've never been a solo player in business or in media. I mean, my story really only is because others are, you know, and I've had a lot of loyal leadership and subordinates that have just lifted me up when I needed to be lifted up, or like said, go, 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 go. Because using those two covers as an example, you know, there wasn't a lot of love necessarily from my higher ups about either one of them initially, and the final execution. It isn't until social media kind of affirms that you're onto something that everyone else is like, oh yeah, you're onto something.
Or CNN. Yeah,
or CNN, exactly. And look at that. So it kind of brokered a space for me to be on television, on CNN of all places. You know, I've done a little bit of TV here and there over the years, but, you know, I now have a very solid relationship with CNN as one network, and they call on me semi-regularly, and it's a great platform, and it really kind of came from the bravado of my work, which I think we all can be brave in our work. You know, I don't even care if you're driving a bus. Like, there's a way to drive a bus with heart, you know? So it's just an important life lesson, because like I said, that Muhammad Ali quote was a necessary thing to remember day in and day out. And I didn't remember it day in and day out, but on the days that I did remember it, I did better. And I think I have a lot of respect from the folks at Ebony. I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but I have to tell the truth. You called me so that I could be honest with your audience of women, and particularly Black women. It wasn't easy. And I think from the outside looking in, folks had presumed that I just arrived because it's such a legendary publication, and there's only one editor-in-chief of a legendary publication at a time. But I can say that it was a year of my life where I lost weight, where I not good weight, where I didn't sleep, where I was high strung and stressed out and worried and missing my kids. And, it wasn't always good for me. But in the end, doing the work and leaning and just still, despite it all, trying to be my best self, both to the people and to the profession. And I think it just netted something more for me. I'm really, really excited about where I am now. I've been a little quiet, forward facing to my own personal audience and to my brand audiences, but that's by design. It's because I'm in the lab now, and I know about seasons. There's a time for light and there's a time for the lab. And lab, and we are going to come back out, and I'm in a very healthy professional environment now, and I'm supported and I'm reassured and lifted up. And so for as long as it lasts, that's what it is. And I'm trying to pull as many people I can along the way.
I am so happy for you, and I'm going to put that quote on my wall. There's a time for the light and a time for the lab.
Yes.
I love that. So in closing, Kierna, if you think over your life and career and you had the chance to thank only one person whose support was critical to you personally or professionally, who would that be and what would you say?
Oh, wow. You make me cry. My mother, Billie Jean Medley Mayo, she just left today to go back to St. Thomas where she lives. And she is in her 70s and she is on Twitter. and not because I'm on Twitter, but and I say that like metaphorically almost, because my mother has always been a maverick. She's always been brave, and she's always been kind of art-led, even though her own professional life didn't allow her. And this is what I mean about our mothers and our mothers' mothers and the ones before them. Many of them just simply didn't have the opportunities that we have. But she, by the example of her own life, and she was motherless very early on. My mom's an only child, and she lost her mother at 14. Her mother died in her 30s from a women's cancer. They didn't even, back then, people didn't even talk about women's cancer. So I don't even know if she had ovarian cancer or we don't know what kind of cancer it was, but it was, quote, a woman's thing. But my 14-year-old mom, alone in the world, carved out, she just was a practicing feminist, without the language, without the politics, without what she's given me, like the shepherding. She just kind of was. She was a probation officer for 30 years, rolls up the ranks like you're supposed to rise when you do something that long. But she stayed fly every single day. And she took me to museums, my sister and myself, and she argued with me and let me argue back. And she reminded me that I was beautiful when I didn't feel beautiful, even just today. She's like, you're everything, And we struggle like I think a lot of moms and daughters do. It's not the perfect relationship. I'm not romanticizing my mother. I'm not being cliche at all. I'm saying she's actually a figure that without her modeling, I just could never have had the spirit to be who I am. I would just say, thank you, Mommy. Thank you, Mommy. Thank you.
I love it. So, Kierna, before you go, how can we support you? What should we be? I know you're just teasing us, but what should we be on the lookout for? I want to make sure I link to everything and that you let everybody know.
Oh, wow. Great. Well, thank you for asking. So I'm at Interactive One, and we are a suite of national sites that speak to Black America. So I have Hello Beautiful and .com, and I have news1.com, and I have theurbandaily.com, and I have globalgrind.com. So right now I am kind of shepherding what's happening with 4 major sites. But the one that I am crafting from scratch that will ultimately be almost the mother of these sites, and that will be broader in the sense that we are speaking to as many people who want to hear, see, and learn about Black culture, Black life, Black POV that will come to the party. So this is, from a media business standpoint, this is the biggest play that I think Interactive One has ever done that we're gearing up for. I could just use you guys on the lookout, and I could use your support on the existing sites, but I certainly, on the day when I'm like, hey, y'all, we're back, I just would love honest critique. I would love honest support. And I would love it if you guys who are writers and thinkers and content creators kept in touch.
Absolutely. And when do you have a time frame yet of when that, no rush, but do you have a time yet of when you think you might?
Yeah, we're looking at April.
April.
So, in April. So we're really close. We're just waiting for the sun to come back out.
There you go. That's awesome. That's wonderful. Karen, I so appreciate you. And well, you already know, but all the work.
I do know. And I appreciate you back just the same.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Before you go, a parting piece of advice from you to our listeners about anything.
Parting piece of advice. Stay up, girls. Don't let them see you sweat. You got this.
Excellent. Karen Mayo, hold on just a second. Thank you.
All right. Talk soon.
Okay.
Oh, you know what else you can do?
Yeah.
Follow me because on my social media, I'm so whack. It's like I have a month on, and then I have a month when I'm off. I need encouragement, and I need to be chided a little bit. So follow me at Karen Mayo, both on Instagram and on Twitter. And I promise at some point, maybe a month later, I'll tweet you back.
Yeah. When she comes back, she comes back. All right. Hold on.
All right.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that rewind with Karen Mayo. Make sure you go to supportissexypodcast.com. If you want to look up more information on Karen, get in touch with her. Just search Kierna, KIERNA, and her show notes page will pop up with all the resources there. And you can see all of the other fantastic women that we've interviewed on the podcast over the past year. And also, if you're looking for some additional support for yourself in your business, your personal brand, your career, whatever you're working on right now, I want you to go check out supportissexymastermind.com. That's supportissexymastermind.com. See all of the great resources, tools, tips, information, connections, everything that's offered there. Have a look, see if it's right for you. If not, still, make sure that you get support. That's what it's all about, making sure that you have support on your journey to be the absolute best that you want to be and to experience the best life that you want to experience. As you know, I always say having it all doesn't mean doing it all alone. So again, check out supportissexymastermind.com. All right, I look forward to catching up with you tomorrow. And until then, you know what to do. Go out there and create something sexy. And I'll talk to you soon. Take care.